This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity Podcast. Today we're going to discuss the Fed holding rate steady plus 9 other stories and why the Fed holding rate steady plus their messaging wasn't really good news for the stock market. It's September 21st, Thursday. So when you're listening to this about stock market news, some of that will be just present as of that day, but some of the stories will be more useful longer term. So first, the markets were sharply down yesterday, about 1%, the NASDAQ down 1.5%, and we'll start off again sharply lower today. Article in Yahoo Finance, stocks retreat as Wall Street braces for higher rates, higher for longer rates. In that regard, the 2-year Treasury has hit a 17-year high. We'll talk about that in a second, and it looks like rates will stay higher for a longer period of time. The positive was the Fed didn't raise rates yesterday, but they did signal 2 things. Another rate hike this year, depending on data, but they also signaled that rates will stay higher for longer, so they're not going to start dialing them back for some time. Second story we're following today, and this is, I think, a good longer-term signal for the U.S. The Bank of England halted their latest interest rate rises, and that's probably a good sign longer term that we won't push things so much higher here. Third, FedEx profits jumped. The stock is up 5% pre-market. We'll see if that holds. I don't know if people expected FedEx to do that well. Fourth, Fed Chairman Powell said something yesterday. I think the market should view quite positively. He viewed one of his core goals as a soft landing. Now, as we see bankruptcies increase and people's credit card debt being over the top, the chances of really a soft landing and we see layoffs increase, I think are getting harder to see, even though so many people expect a soft landing. I see too many companies. We had a higher level of bank defaults this August, or company defaults August, than we've had in a very long time. And I see that more companies, even if they have quote unquote EBITDA, are struggling with cash flow. So I see more chance of a debacle. I also see more layoffs, which for people that are highly extended can be real trouble. But it is very positive, I think, that Chairman Powell has his eyes on both issues, not just bringing inflation down, but also soft landing, because I think we're in need of trying to hit those two between the middle. Fifth, Apple fell 2% yesterday. So I want you to watch Apple today, as it's the biggest stock in the country, with Microsoft on its heels, just a few hundred, 2.7 trillion to 2.4 trillion, not that far behind. In the old days, there used to be a phrase, as goes GM or as goes GE, goes the country, or the same with the big 3 automakers. Now more and more it seems as goes Apple, as goes Microsoft, so goes the country. Our sixth story, I'll just do this very quickly, is 3 or 4 of our most highly listened guests on the Becker's Healthcare Podcast. The Becker's Healthcare Podcast was ranked 14th this week of all Apple Business News podcasts. Dina Davalachi, American Association of Nurse Anesthetists, Don Seco, Chief Executive Officer, Chief Integrity Officer at Cleveland Clinic, Justin Oppenheimer, brilliant Chief Strategy Officer at the Hospital for Special Surgery. Hospital for Special Surgery has been ranked number 1 in orthopedics in the U.S. for the last 14 or 15 years, maybe number 1 in the country. And finally, Malinka Wallende and Benjamin Beadle-Ribby, brilliant founders of Akasa, are also ranked really highly in the Becker's Healthcare Podcast, together with Dr. Suzette Oyeko at Montefiore Health System. So that's on the Becker's Healthcare side. And the Becker Private Equity side, here's 5 of our most highly listened to guests, and I'll get past this to other stories very quickly, we promise. Rick Kess and Matt Wolf are number 1 and 2 from RSM, the great consulting and accounting firm. Third is Julie Yu from Andreessen Horowitz. She's brilliant at one of the great venture capital funds in the country. As full disclosure, I'm an investor in Andreessen Horowitz funds and some of their companies, so I follow them closely. Next is David Pivnik, brilliant partner at McGuire Woods. Also in that top 5 is Nicholas Schull, a student and the son of David Schull, and a brilliant young person with the Gator Student Investment Fund, Florida Gators fan. And so that's Nicholas Schull. A couple other notable people in the top 10, Amber Walsh and Holly Buckley of McGuire Woods. The 8th story we're following today is U.S. Treasuries hit a 17-year high on hawkish Fed comments. That was reported by Reuters. 9th story, weight loss drugs. have the ability to really negatively impact the obesity companies companies that treat obesity complications. There's a story about this in Barron's, and that's fascinating to watch. And the 10 stories, another story that's in line with this credit card debt issue. Credit card debt is still a big problem. Even the Fed didn't hike interest rates, as a story in Yahoo Finance today. Credit card debt is at record numbers for Americans. That's just a scary thought. If 20% interest on a lot of that stuff, and if you lose your job or don't have emergency funds, having huge credit card debt, huge home equity debt, and more is a real problem. There's a story we did yesterday that should be out today on life and business not being a binary suit. It's not often either or. It's often both in terms of greatness in life and so many different characteristics. And I hope you'll listen to that as well. That should be released today. I want to thank our producer today, Kate Cruz from Executive Podcasting Solutions, the best in the business. Again, any comments on this podcast, any ideas for topics, feel free to reach Scott Becker at 773-766-5322. We're always, of course, also looking for magnificent guests on the Becker Private Equity Podcast. Thank you for listening.